Welcome, everybody. My name is Tyrone Harrison, and I'm joined with the other Tyrone Harrison.
Tyrone Harrison 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so this is the Fisher of the Men podcast. And essentially, we're going to be linking the secular world with the spiritual world, discussing social issues and topics that affect a lot of our population in the United States and in your local neighborhood. So, one of the first things we kind of wanted to jump right into, and Dad, we spoke about this previously, is gun violence, right? We see every time we turn on the news, we see gun violence and gangs and shootings and deaths. And we figured that'd be a good starting point. Historically, we've seen in the last ever since the pandemic, the gun deaths, I would say, circulated from 46,000 a year to last year, we actually went down to about 45,000. And so half of those are ranked in suicides. And so when you think of statistics like that, where you have numbers well over 45,000 and half those are suicide. What kind of stands out to you initially when you hear numbers like that?
Well, the first thing stands out to me is a question: what is the cause? What's the main reason for that, and why the escalation in such a short period of time, and why such a wide range of violence? And so I did a little research on that, and I thought about first thing we have to do to come to even getting close to before we get to the whys and understanding the whys is we have to really understand what violence is and what are some of the causes of the violence. Because it seems like over the last decade, it seems like it just blew up out of nowhere. And what do you attribute that to?
Man, I think it's a number of things. I think it's culture. A lot of the stuff we see in media, whether I know a lot of times, I would say early 2000s. I was thinking back to the video games. Remember the video games back in the day? I think one of them stands out the most, like Grand Theft Auto and Duke Nukem. When you have young kids watching, violent video games, you see the media portraying, like in movies, a lot of the violence, the appeal of sex, money, murder. Then the other big factor is just culture, and especially in the African American culture with the music. Those are huge contributing factors. And then, of course, we can go down the rabbit hole and think of like, fatherhood and then the family, the lack of parenting at home, which is probably one of the biggest factors. But I think it's not just one or two. I think it's just a number of issues that kind of affect, gun violence, especially not just in the Black community, but just Americans overall.
Okay. Well, all those are good causes. Would it be safe to say a lot of it has to do with being born in a culture like this, into a violent culture?
Yeah, it could be.
Okay. I'm just probing and picking because there's one specific answer that I came up with that is directly related. For one, we have to really define what is violence. Of course, Webster defines violence as behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something, to injure or abuse, violent treatment, outrage, intense, turbulent, or furious and often destructive action or force. So, what I attribute to that is, first of all, we have to realize that all violence in my studies, I've come to understand all violence actually comes from, and this is kind of with a spiritual twist also, it all comes from a lack of love and respect. I don't care whether it's gun violence, I don't care whether it's spousal violence, assault, rape, you name it, any kind of toward humanity. I come to find out that all violence comes from a lack of love and respect. Because if you love and respect each other, that would decrease violence. So those are two main factors that contribute to the violence is a lack of love and a lack of respect. And what I mean by that, a lack of love for God first and then for one another. See, because if you have the proper respect for God and His authority and His creation, knowing that we all created by God, then if we had a proper respect for God and the laws of God, then we can establish the proper respect and love for each other. But see, that's part of the laws of God. We were never commanded to like each other, but He says, see to it that you love one another. So if you take out love and respect out of the culture that you're born into, the inherent failure nature of man, and so you take out the love and the respect on top of that, then you put in all the drugs, you put in the lack of education, you go back to the history of slavery, you go back to segregation, go back to the separation of family. Boom, there you go. You got a big ball of confusion there, and everything is in that. So then you beg to see solutions. Well, how do you deal with it? It's multiple things that you have to deal with. You got to deal with the fallen nature of man. You got to deal with the lack of parenting. You got to deal with the lack of education. You got to deal with that from a historical perspective. So all that ties into being properly educated from an early age. And so where we are right now today, the only way that can be intercepted or even begin to deal with it is at the lowest level you can, at the youngest age possible, to retrain and to retool the thinking and the habits of the culture that we've been born into. So that means that takes a lot of research, takes a lot of groundwork, and it takes going back to the foundation of things and building the proper foundation. Just like if you build a house or anything or any structure, if you don't lay the proper foundation, you're going to have a lopsided house. And with anything, if you don't start it out right, you can't end up right if it's not squared up on the proper foundation. So I think that's the basis, first of all, where we can look at how intense the violence is getting and how fast the violence is escalating. Because if man doesn't have the proper reference point to get the correction, then it's just going to continue to go sideways and lopsided at an escalating pace.